You haven't eaten in 2 days. You know where the herd crossed the ridge yesterday. You know the wind will carry your scent wrong if you go at dawn instead of dusk. The whole hunt is already built in your head. All you have to do is walk to it. Then the storm comes in off the coast and doesn't leave. Not rain that passes through in an hour. Rain that sits on top of you for 3 days straight, turns every slope to paste, and swallows every track before you can read it. You can't run on wet rock with bare feet. One wrong step and a torn tendon is a death sentence out here, just a slower one than starvation. So you don't move. You wait. And waiting, for most of human history, was not rest. It was one of the most dangerous things a body could do. Today, a 3-day storm means you reorganize your streaming queue. For a group of humans 100,000 years ago, the same 3 days could unravel everything they'd built, and sometimes it did. Cold first. Wet skin loses heat dramatically faster than dry skin, and without tailored, layered clothing, hours of exposure in temperatures most people would call mild is enough to push a body into hypothermia. Sites in the Dordogne region of France show repeated short-term abandonment of shelters during cold, wet phases of the last glacial period, not famine, not conflict. Just cold that outlasted the fire. Second, water itself. At Pinnacle Point on the South African coast, a site occupied on and off for over 160,000 years, researchers led by archaeologist Curtis Marian found sediment layers consistent with storm surge and flooding cutting directly into the occupation floor. People weren't just rained on. The sea came in while they were living there. Third, and this is the one that should unsettle you, shelter competition. Kebara Cave in Israel preserves hearths used by Neanderthals tens of thousands of years ago, but it also preserves carnivore den layers stacked in the same sequence of sediment. Storms pushed hyenas and big cats toward the same dry, defensible ground humans wanted. Whoever got there first didn't always keep it. So the world didn't just get uncomfortable. It got smaller. Every predator, every rival group, every desperate animal looking for the same dry ledge, all pressed into the same few square meters of cave floor. And in the middle of that, one task outranked every other task combined: the fire could not go out. We have solid evidence of controlled fire use going back at least 300,000 to 400,000 years, at sites like Qesem Cave in Israel, where repeated hearths sit in the same spot over immense stretches of time. But maintaining an existing flame and generating a brand new one from nothing are not the same skill, and there's real debate among archaeologists about how reliably early humans could do the second one. So if the fire drowned, some groups may not have been able to simply strike a new one. They carried it instead, smoldering coals wrapped in damp-resistant bark, or packed into slow-burning fungal tinder that could hold an ember for hours without flame. We know this wasn't improvised guesswork, because it survived into recorded history. 19th-century ethnographic accounts describe Aboriginal groups across parts of Australia carrying fire sticks, smoldering lengths of wood on long journeys specifically so a fire never had to be rebuilt from scratch. If people were still doing this within living memory, you can be fairly confident the habit is far, far older than the record that caught it. So during a storm, the fire got moved to the driest ledge available, screened with hide or brush, and fed by someone whose entire job for the day was reading dead branches for the ones that stayed dry under the canopy, splitting waterlogged logs to reach the dry heartwood inside, and stripping bark from trees whose natural oils burn even when soaked. One person, sitting still for hours, keeping a fire alive that the whole group's survival ran through. The archaeological record inside storm sheltering caves isn't a record of idleness. It's a record of production. At Blombos Cave, a South African site with layers spanning roughly 100,000 to 70,000 years ago, archaeologists recovered engraved ochre pieces and a processing kit, abalone shells used as mixing containers, ground pigment, bone applicators. Someone sat still long enough to run a small, repeatable manufacturing process, probably more than once. Bone needles with drilled eyes start showing up in southern African sites tens of thousands of years ago, and later spread into Europe and Asia. You don't make an object that precise while moving. You make it seated, focused, with far more hours available than any single task requires. At Hohle Fels Cave in Germany, archaeologists recovered a roughly 35,000-year-old carved ivory tool with drilled holes designed specifically for twisting plant fiber into cordage, essentially a dedicated rope-making device. Rope is slow to make and endlessly useful. It lashes tools to handles, builds snares, reinforces shelter frames. Someone carved a machine whose entire purpose was to make more of it. And at Sibudu Cave, also in South Africa, researchers found layered bedding made from sedges and rushes dating back roughly 77,000 years with leaves from an insect-repelling plant folded into the top layer, and evidence the whole bedding stack was periodically burned and replaced. That's pest control, nearly 80,000 years before anyone wrote the concept down. Because the tools and the bedding are the practical response to being trapped. The art is not. Cave paintings at sites like Lascaux, dated to roughly 17,000 years ago, show animals rendered with real anatomical understanding, musculature, posture, motion caught mid-stride. And in Sulawesi, Indonesia, figurative art dated to at least 45,000 years old currently holds the record for the oldest known representational painting on Earth. These images are rarely near the cave mouth, where the shelter actually is. They're deep in, past narrow crawl passages, in total darkness that required someone to carry a fat-fueled lamp in by hand. Nobody makes that trip during good hunting weather with daylight to spare. That trip gets made when there is nothing left to sharpen, nothing left to twist into rope, and hours still left to fill. We can't prove the art was born from storm-bound boredom. But the pattern lines up too cleanly to ignore. The deepest creative output in the prehistoric record sits inside the exact spaces where people were most likely stuck. Put 15 to 25 people in a confined space for days with nothing urgent to do, and they talk. Anthropologist Corin Apicella's research among the Hadza of Tanzania found that firelit, nighttime conversation skews heavily towards storytelling and social topics, in sharp contrast to the practical, resource-focused talk of daytime hours. Darkness and firelight change what a group is willing to say out loud to each other. Some of what got said was pure survival data, where water holds through a dry season, which plants are poison, which ridge the herd favors in a given wind. But some of it was myth. Nearly every human culture has a story explaining where rain comes from and where it goes, and whoever invented the first version of that story was almost certainly sitting inside the very weather they were trying to explain. One of the clearest proofs that this kind of oral transmission actually works comes from the Klamath people of Oregon, whose traditional stories describe the violent collapse of a mountain that geologists now date to roughly 7,700 years ago, the eruption that created Crater Lake. That detail survived for thousands of years, carried by nothing but voices repeating it around a fire, generation after generation. So the storm-bound hours weren't dead time. They were the transmission window, the hours when the old taught the young, when the group's collective memory got refreshed and checked against itself. Once the rain stops, soft ground holds tracks better than dry ground ever does. Depth, direction, speed, all legible at once. Storms also fill natural stone basins with clean water, and several prehistoric sites show these basins deliberately deepened or shaped to hold more of it. Wet soil loosens tubers. Insects surface. Termite swarms follow rain across parts of tropical Africa, and they're one of the densest protein sources available. With zero tools required, chimpanzees exploit these swarms today, and there's little reason to think early humans didn't do the same, at scale. So when the sky finally cleared, people didn't walk out to a world that had punished them for 3 days. They walked out to a world that had just handed them water, food, and the clearest tracking conditions of the season. The fire held. The tools got made. The rope got twisted. The bedding got replaced. The pigment got ground. Somewhere deep in the dark, someone carried a lamp past the point where shelter turned into art. And around the flame, the stories that would outlive every person listening to them got told, once again, from memory. None of that came from a clear day with a full stomach and a herd in sight. All of it came from being trapped from the hours with nothing to do but sit still and make something out of them.